Good morning, Steve. Well, morning or afternoon. I guess it's afternoon now.
Good afternoon to you. Yes.
I'm very excited for this conversation because you and I have known each other for 6 years plus now. Our dear friend Ryan Blundell introduced us, and we had a lot of common connections. And as I was, I just got done with a 2-day boot camp that we do with in person. You've been a part of some of those, a bunch of your members, and which is hence my voice because I've been talking, I think, for 3 days straight, and this constant theme of, hey, it's the end of the year. We're planning. What's the goal? What's the point be? And I was like, you know what? Steve has been talking to business owners for almost 30 years now about this topic. And I wanted to get you on the show to talk about, like, hey, what have people been doing so far up, in your experience? A lot of systems have come out over the years that you've seen come and go. Some have stuck. And I want to talk about you kind of representing the body of stage 2 entrepreneurs and your members. And then you and I can go back and forth about, like, what does good planning look like and what does that mean to have intentional growth. But one thing that really impressed me when I met you was the approach that you took to your members in your community, because there's education first. So maybe for the listeners, give a little bit of your background and how you actually got into the CEO peer group business model.
Definitely through the side door. Was not ever envisioned as a end game, which actually makes it more meaningful, I think. I had came out of the corporate consulting world, background in market research, and I guess my first client at the time, which is now 20 years ago, was a fellow named Edward Lowe. And Edward was the inventor and founder of kitty litter and the cat box industry that we've come to take for granted. But basically, the backstory is he put dirt in a bag. He had a roadshow, giving it away at first on consignment, and basically created multi-billion-dollar industry that was later sold. And in his legacy years, I worked with him on some of the other businesses that he had spun up. And then the foundation that was established in his name, and his heart was really for the journey of entrepreneurs and the challenges they face. And before he passed away, the sweet spot that we looked at that he said he wanted us to focus on was beyond startup. And before they became a fully functional professional operation. And it was this space that we later defined as second stage, meaning you weren't a lifestyle business. You were a growth-oriented business owner. And he said he felt most isolated, or he felt the challenges increased, but the resources within the community and beyond diminished, and you were on your own, and you turned basically you came to rely on your peers, those that were in that 1 to 50 million range, and that 15 to 150 employees. That's the sweet spot. Now we have many clients that are larger and some that are smaller, but they're all growing and trying to solve the problems that come with that stage of development. And so that program that we developed in concert with what became the Edward Lowe Foundation evolved and became my business, my life's work, and sort of the servant leadership of, if we can help that audience achieve their goals, we're going to make a difference for the people that work for them, for the communities they serve, and for the free enterprise system that he loved and wanted to sustain.
I absolutely love it. And correct me if I'm wrong in any of these facts, because it's been years since you told me the origin story, but wasn't it that he tried to figure out what charities and nonprofits to put it into, and then he kind of figured out that the best leverage was through entrepreneurs, and then you guys, because wasn't the whole setup was there kind of the economic development and gardening, and I don't want to conflate any states, but there's this whole like education first, hours of research and development, and like a free peer group to get people to that next stage. Am I on track there?
There are facts embedded in that story, but they're a little bit conflated. Is that we took that peer group emphasis and started to roll it out throughout Michigan, Wisconsin, and Midwest, where he grew up, where his foundation was located. And I happened to live in Florida at the time, and they said, why aren't we doing the same thing in Florida? And so I said, well, let me look around and find out what's the best way to evolve. And concurrently, we had come across a program that was described as economic gardening, growing businesses locally, and then giving them the resources they needed to scale. and they had a research-based, database model, and we had a peer group-based model, and we basically wedded the two into something a variation, and that's I think what you're describing.
Got it.
And our hub and spoke model was partner with institutions and then serve entrepreneurs through economic development entities in additional markets. And we were able to reach the largest number and scale fastest through that public-private type of partnership.
Got it.
Proved very successful in Florida, and then we in turn morphed and evolved into other markets, and I think Minnesota is where we overlapped at that time.
Yeah. And right, you were the smarter man of the two of us because you stayed in Florida and you just commute here to see family once a month. And I'm trying to inverse that. And Steve, one of the things that I liked so much from the day one when I met you is it was your approach was, what are the best resources out there for these entrepreneurs? Which, from doing this now for almost 10 years, a lot of other advisors or resources, it's a lot of like, how can they make money off of referrals and stuff like that? Then comes the member, where like every time I've spoken to you, it's like I'm talking to 100 to 200 business owners at the same time, because you're just always protecting and thinking about them. And so when I think about over the years, like maybe talk a little bit more about your model in the context, because then I think as we get into then, what does annual planning look like and what are people doing? You've come across a lot of systems and frameworks and stuff like that over the years, and you continue to refine yours, but maybe kind of give everybody your overall approach and how you structure it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we start with sort of the themes that begin with a notion of servant leadership. If you're serving a client well, good things happen for them and then for you. And then if you have the long game in mind, it just, multiplies. So we started with Ed's vision of growth oriented second stage businesses. How do they differ and what do they need? And how do we either add value directly or find partners that understand and can fill that need? So I'm always in search of someone who gets that second stage mindset, who has the core values of the long-term serving, because entrepreneurship is messy and sometimes slower than we'd like. So if you're not in it for the right reason, you'll either grow weary of the second stage audience and move on, or you won't serve them well. And
it gets harder way faster.
That's right. So if you get it, so to speak, then it's just natural that you find other people that get it, and core values tend to drive that. So the values that drive us, in fact, are the values we look for in others, which is long-term, servant leadership, educating or adding value before expecting. So relational versus transactional. So I mean, nothing new. It's just that if you build it with the right partners, if you build it with the right end in mind, you tend to get a more sustainable, valuable network, which is, I think, what we've built. So I mentioned along the way, we were introduced to and embraced this whole notion of EOS or traction, and that tends to be thematically a resource that we see as very aligned with second stage. They're growing into a point where complexity and where process and procedure become more important. And, my client base, our network is a whole bunch of talented visionaries trying to solve things that are better attuned to their integrator and trying to strike the right balance and using a methodology or a framework like traction helps. Well, the same thing when you're trying to grow the resources around them, that's not just traction, but it's the needs that they have. You want to have those core values driving your decisions. You want to, reaching out, and inevitably, annual planning becomes one of those rocks that you want to do better at. And, you learn early on that hope is not a strategy or a budgeting process. And sometimes we get habitually into, I'm going to take historics last year, add 5%. And roll the dice.
Divide by 12, right?
Obviously, EOS wouldn't let you get away with that, but there's so many entrepreneurs at second stage are in the midst of or are growing that, and so we try to provide context or point them to people who think differently, and whether it's from their peers or subject matter experts like you and the Arcona team. I mean, we're always trying to match and meet the need that, we have very few of the answers in terms of our leadership or our peer group. It's really through the managing the peer group process and connecting them with subject matter experts outside at the right time in the right way. That just-in-time learning that makes the model work. And
Yep.
and so in the annual planning is like, here we go again. Now let's just do it better this time. And so, using traction as an example, the discipline of having a system of running the business, of running your annual planning makes a world of difference. And that's what, we see. And so, what are the elements of that? Ability, that system, and any, I think, well-run annual planning means you step out of the office, you step out of your business to work on the business, right? So you go to a third part or third place. And having an outside implementer, again, it's not required, but it makes a world of difference because it brings the objectivity into the discussion. And it's a way to hold CEOs and leadership teams accountable, because sometimes, you've got passive aggressive, we're all human. And so
Is that the lingering over of Minnesota culture over there?
Minnesota, nice. It's not just Minnesota, but yeah. So having the tough, authentic conversations typically happens when you have someone who's holding one another accountable, and a third
Yep.
party can make
Yep.
a difference.
So super helpful launching pad for this discussion. And before we're getting into some of what I believe that like good budgeting and planning tied to the right goals, and how EOS, the functional areas, and the VTO, all that fit in nicely with some of the stuff that we've been talking about together about treating your company as an asset. But before we get to some of that stuff, Steve, I think this is my own personal curiosity, because of like, I watch how you and myself over the years too, where like with how many entrepreneurs you work with, you kind of get these universal themes. And I have found over the years that was a byproduct of something that I enjoy, that I didn't expect, of like, hey, it's like seeing above all of the, like, what are the common problems and the common themes. So like, I go back to like, maybe you can give us a little insight of like when EOS started coming around, because I had our family business when that came around, and we just got introduced to it right before we sold. So we'd never really, with the big infrastructure that we had, we didn't have the ability to actually roll it all out. But I'm curious, from someone like you sitting in all these peer groups, how did like the conversation start? And like, hey, this is something, and like, what was it providing for the owners that didn't have it? And then they were like, what was it solving for them? Because then I want to tee that up before we talk about potential gaps that it might have.
I mean, are you specifically referencing?
Yeah, EOS. Yeah.
Right. So, we ran our program for years before we were introduced to EOS. That was probably 12 years ago that we were introduced to EOS. And it sort of crystallized a need that wasn't being met, which is, as you grow into second stage, sometimes it's unintentional. Sometimes people just grow until they hit their head at a point where their sheer will and their experience can't solve the next problem. That's the value of a peer group, is you got the 10x power of peers that can solve most problems, but inevitably there's still things they can't. And then we bring in speakers and resources. But the beauty of framework of traction, and again, there are others. I don't mean to say this is a traction.
To be scaling up OKRs and like any system that you're bringing to help people, right?
But traction did such a brilliant job of distilling it down into a digestible method of applying it to a second stage business. Now, they don't use that terminology, but the notion is, when you're beyond startup but not yet, this fully professional operation, you need to solve process and systems probably sooner than you think, before the problems become bigger than they need to be. And there's just a beauty to how traction gives you that consistency. And this is what I've come to see after all these years, is that it's a great platform to bolt on other expertise that solve specifics within, whether it's finance or marketing or sales, or culture. There are certain tools that bolt on beautifully. I mean, they work better when they bolt onto a framework that's already in place. And so we saw it and we applied it. Our members just gobbled it up. They saw themselves in the stories and all of the
Got it.
and they said, I need this. And now then the hard part is, how do you do it? Because it's not like one and done, read it and done. You gotta you got to make tough decisions. You've got to make compromises. Some people don't survive the accountability chart and all the things that go with transparency and accountability. So it puts pressure on a business. The benefit and why I think it's worked for us is that the peer group is the place to address and relieve some of that pressure. And so when a CEO is wrestling with a tough decision that may or may not have emerged through EOS, the notion is they've got trusted peers, objective feedback to either confirm or to redirect their decision making in a, we always say better decisions faster and with greater confidence. That
I love it.
All the same decisions, but because of EOS, because of the peer group, because of the wedding of sort of the trust that happens in that environment, we just make better decisions faster with greater confidence. I see it all the time. And so we may not give the answer, we may not even agree with it, but they get to that end. And then they become a better business owner and then a better business because they pass that in, throughout the organization.
Oh, I love it. I really like those three things. That's because I mean, better decisions faster with more confidence. And I think about that. It resonates with me because that sounds like less anxiety. just less stress in general. Like instead of like placing a huge bet on whatever you're gonna do and just hoping it works out.
Well, I can say because I work alongside peer groups and CEOs, not over weeks or months, but it's years. Many of our members join and they renew and renew and renew because it's that safe harbor in their business and in their life where they can talk about the tough things and where they can solve the tough things. But the notion is I've seen them confront issues, solve them, save their business, transform their business. And in doing so, they find peace, meaning if you build the systems that other people can run, if you make decisions better, faster, with greater confidence, you're not carrying around the same weight that you were before you were in the peer group, running a system and seeing your business with clarity. I mean, the whole transparency and bringing data in, it's also simple, but it's hard for a visionary to do when they're running and their hair's on fire.
Yep. Oh my gosh, so true. So I think the next logical step of what to chat about is like the goals. And so I think again over the decades, like because I want to talk about better decisions, faster, more confident.
You're a little too aggressive with the decades thing.
Well, I mean, when did you say
that long? But I know it's been long enough.
I won't say a few decades. I'll say a couple.
I have context based on enough time. How's that?
Okay. Fair enough. So, but I think it's important to highlight just like you had said, over years you're with the same people. Because you had said the big thing that I think is the most important takeaway of that, all joking aside, is that you can see someone understand and articulate what they want, try things, see how those worked, and then overcome them and keep going. And because you've been with them through a journey as they've been working towards something. And so with the second stage entrepreneurs, I mean, you have very genuine, wonderful people that are in your community. And I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to meet and know lots of them. What do you think that your members and by association, just second stage entrepreneurs in general, what do you think that they're searching for and in their goals? What do you think a lot of them are trying to accomplish? And there's probably variations, but I don't know if you got kind of like a short list.
Yeah. I would say that as they grow in that confidence part of the equation where they see their business differently, they're running their business versus the business running them. And this is a function of the peer group plus EOS or some system, plus enough time to overcome the problems that are inevitable and to know that the next problem can be surmounted. So it takes away some of that unknown and that fear. So with that time, and then the force multiplier of seeing someone else go through something and learning from that without having to do it helps you both have confidence that you can do it when you face something, but also you can avoid what they just confronted because you've done it third party, right? That's the power of the peer group. So from a annual planning standpoint, I think, and the traction application, I think they see their business and they are their ability to see what's possible expands, meaning they know kind of how the company can flex because they got a framework that it operates in. They've seen how data can inform their decisions, and they, I think, are oftentimes more inclined to take reasonable risks that in the past they might have been too cautious about. So their role as a leader expands through the combined confidence and the context of their peers.
It's almost like they're I had this one, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Dan Martell. He said, one of the interviews I had, he said, your vision as a leader and entrepreneur has to be big enough for the company and all the people fit inside of it. And I was like, that's such a cool way of describing that. So like, and I know you've been through our material a lot because of the partnership that CEO Nexus and Arcona has. And I think about, what is it that you think that people are striving for? Because the vision, when I think about principle number one, so many times we go to like the Simon Sinek of the why circle, which is like, hey, it's a computer that's trying to solve, but like as business owners that are of second stage, you're like your livelihood, your identity, your financials are all sucked up into this machine. So it's not just like my product needs to be better for the consumer. So like the people that you're talking about, what do you think they're trying to solve in their life with their business? Like, kind of the multidimensional, what do you think the vision is that they're trying to solve? Or, and again, that could be there's probably variations of it.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you, if there's a historical kind of catchphrase, if you ask an owner before they've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid and understand EOS, understand the complexity and the potential of the business, if you ask them, what's the end game for your business? And they'll say, 5 to 10 years, I'll do this, and this, or I'll be ready to sell. And then you ask them the same question in 3 years, it's 5 to 10. There's always this horizon, a shifting horizon. And I think when you bring in the accountability of the peer group, the accountability of something like traction, it becomes more precise and it becomes tied to some outcome. And so all of the pain and struggle that any owner goes through becomes clarified as to what they can get out of it, both personal and professional. And that's what we always do. We our theme, as you maybe have seen, is this overarching term, your ownership journey. I mean, it's your business, it's your journey, and we're going to try to catch up to you. We're going to try to add value as you see it, as you need it. And we're going to try to bring in new ideas that maybe you haven't thought of. And this is where I think our relationship with Arcona is so powerful, is that you have real clarity on how to get from where you are to where you want to be, and be accountable in doing it on the ownership side, not just on the leadership side. And so oftentimes our clients come in focusing on leadership issues, just the fundamentals of running a business, and not thinking about the ownership or the value creation side, which is their, in the end, their game. And why should you feel like you're in a hurry to solve something when you don't have enough time to do it because you started too late? We want to get them to start earlier.
I love it. And I want to give you a solid shout out and credit for making me change the management versus ownership roles to leadership versus ownership roles. You're like, hey, that word leadership is a lot better than management. And it took me 1 second to go, yep, you're right. Like, and because, we've got these two roles and a lot of your members do it. If you were to ask them, Steve, because the end goal makes sense. And I like how you frame that up, and we're going to get into the meat of like how, what does that actually look like? What is that precision? That's kind of how I think we want to land this plane in this conversation. But if you were to ask most of your members right now, why are you doing it? Yeah. How do you think, how would they answer that?
It varies, and some have real clarity because they're a serial entrepreneur and they've done this dance before, or they've been around the right people and they understand the context and where to go. But sadly, not everyone does or can. And until challenged, who in the business is challenging them about that? That's right. Not coming from below. And unless you're in a peer group or you have investors or advisors that you are in fact mentors, it's kind of one of those questions that's, yeah, I'll get to it later, but it never gets defined. And
Mhm.
the beauty of peers is that, they'll let you get away with that for a while, but pretty soon, what are you
You've
trying to
been
do?
complaining about this for a long time,
Yeah,
Steve. What are you trying to solve for?
that's exactly it. So, long way around to your question. I don't know that there's universal appreciation or clarity as to what they're in it for, other than so many are trying to get away from, meaning they realize they were unemployable at a very young age, and they've made success out of that in spite of that, or they do want some autonomy, and entrepreneurship, ownership gives you that, but they didn't at the time know what went with it, and so then they're in this.
Yeah, autonomy. I can do whatever I want, hypothetically, as you're trying to meet payroll and get your suppliers in line.
Right. So I wish there was more clarity, and I could say universally everyone knows it and they're heading toward that goal and they're going to ring the bell, but surprisingly, not as many as you might think. And again,
Mhm.
that's our small sample, our little world, and our second stage slice. I mean, everything has to be. The caveat has to be, we focus on growth oriented second stage
Mhm.
businesses,
Uh,
and any extrapolation beyond that, I couldn't say.
Yeah, and I think that's we share a huge percentage overlap with the Venn diagram of our clients and the listeners on this show, and then your members. And I think this is unbelievable context for like every year people sit down and they go, "We're gonna go off site for 2 days," and I swear to God, I bet you half the people just want to go take a nap somewhere for 2 days just to get away to work on the business. But like, what do you think? Like, before we, because I know you've got some questions for me about like what goes into like making sure that all of the EOS, the VTO, the plans are all tied together the right way. But like, what do you think? I mean, what are your thoughts about the VTO and and this is not like you said specific to traction or EOS, but like what are your thoughts about goals that owners set that are like that you've seen over the years, like whether it's revenue based, because it's so
Yeah.
many times it's revenue based and what that does
Well,
based on their
I'll give
actions.
you an example from a recent group without naming names. If the owner doesn't engage the team, first of all, do they have the right seats on the bus, right people on the bus, right? So let's assume that they do.
Okay.
If I hear enough examples, and there was one just last week where the owner realized they didn't engage the people. They were more setting the peg and then challenging them, and that's almost a formula for failure. Now you can bully people for a certain amount of time, but if they're not aligned and they're not bought in, and if they're not pulling the same direction, stretch goals are tough, and
Hmm.
compensation only gets you so far. So I would say, getting that team right. I mean, our sort of learning focuses over the years is concentrated on self-awareness for the CEO, alignment for the leadership team, and then engage culture. And we try to focus on, if you get better self-awareness for the CEO, they will make better decisions. And part of that comes from being in a peer group, but part of it is just literally, emotional intelligence. So many times they'll say is, the big successful Fortune 500 leaders will inevitably write in their memoirs, emotional intelligence is more important than IQ, and how to develop, and it can be developed. It's not static. And our second stage CEOs, same thing. Then getting the team aligned, and if you're not, and to have them aligned, you got to be working together. And if you try to do annual planning and you haven't adequately invited them in, created shared goals, and then assigned and created accountability, next year you're at the same place trying it again. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
the CEO's role going into that environment is really important. And what I see, just like with traction, is if you don't have an outside voice in traction world, an implementer, you don't get the same value out of the traction process, just like you wouldn't get it out of annual planning. Now, you don't have to have the implementer at any point in time in annual planning, but someone in that role
Right.
is, I think, essential, because there's a lot of dynamics, and the implementer is looking objectively at all the faces and all the body language, and the CEO is carrying lots of biases and lots of assumptions,
Hmm.
and that extra set of eyes makes a world of difference. And so I hear
Yep.
feedback because I'm not in
Yep.
all these meetings, of course, but they'll talk about how incredibly valuable that outside strategic planning guy was.
Yep.
In the beginning, they think they're that role in the beginning, and then they realize that there's value in adding to the team.
Well, right, because also, like you said, I mean, I had interviewed this one guy, Charlie, and his advisor, Billy, and Charlie said it was a very well done servant leadership example, and he's like, the moment I talk, the moment the meeting's over, and I was like, it's a really interesting way of putting it, and so I'm gonna now try and articulate where I see the gap in what people have been doing, because I like the scenario that you just laid out. I've been a part of that in my own companies prior to what I'm doing right now, which is we're all sitting down and it's like almost like the it's getting holiday season. So I'm thinking about like, I sit down with my kids, like, what do you want? Back when there were magazines, you'd circle the stuff that you wanted in the magazines. And that's kind of what I think about this annual planning is like, we say, okay, what's our BHAG? 10, 5, 3, 1, quarters. And we go, okay, throughout the magazines, everybody circles what they want. The marketing people want, new, they want the HubSpot. The operations person wants the new ERP system. HR wants new payroll. And so then I go, okay. And then revenue is the goal. And then there's this timeline. And the challenge that I've like, my brain just broke and now I can't see. It's like this, the matrix. I can't not see it anymore, where it's like, if you think about it, if I wanted to come from Minnesota to Florida, and I will never forget, because anybody that's listening right now that has seen the keynote, the reason that Google Maps from point A to point B is from Minnesota to Florida is because of Steve. He goes, you should have him come to Florida. Like, yeah, that's really where I want to go. So like, if I want to go to Florida, I have to have a timeline, and that's my goal. Right. And then all of the resources and the constraints of those resources become apparent. And what I have seen now is like you have so it's like great. Like, let's say someone's running EOS perfectly. They've got the sales and marketing function, they got the ops function, and then they got the finance function, they got the visionary up top. And then it's this hypothetical circle what you want. And then we have a revenue target. And I'm like, but that's not the ultimate goal. That's gonna align all of the projects and how much they cost and whether it grows value. And so I see this massive gap. It's like, what are people doing? Like, what if it's not worth it? And you said like better decisions, faster, more confidence. But what if the goal's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And like, so how have you seen, like, and I'm not saying that this is a parent in every single business owner out there, but like when that goal is wrong, like how have you seen that manifest in groups where like people are running and they haven't allocated resources or they don't have a valuation target and it's revenue? How does that show up in people's conversations throughout the year?
I'll give you an example from one of the members in one of our Florida groups that will be remain unnamed. that they didn't have the three statements aligned, which I know you're going to talk about shortly. And so they took advantage of certain opportunities regarding inventory. The supply chain has been brutal for the longest time. They had some opportunities, but because they weren't synced up in the financial statements, they created a huge cash crunch 3 months later that could have been seen and could have been avoided, and they had to navigate it real time and through the peer group and through their team, the whole thing. But it was the old Box Canyon example, in the old Western movies, when the bad guy or the bad guys turned right into a canyon, and the good guys behind them knew it was a box canyon. They just stopped and made some coffee, because they knew that those guys are going to go 3 miles down and hit a wall that they couldn't escape, and they were trapped. So the idea is they made a decision 3 months earlier regarding supply chain and inventory. They created a box canyon for their finances, and they were blind to it, which is why I love what you guys do and how you sync up the three statements and how you help people make insightful decisions, in effect, treating their business like an asset. So I don't know if this is a great segue for you, but I
it is.
see that happen. And it comes back to us when they're in the box canyon, right? If we had been talking about it, had more transparency into the finances, like you guys suggest, we would maybe have, instead of turning right, we'd have kept going straight, right, and avoided the problem. in full disclosure for the limited audience that overlaps with our network, we've struck a strategic alliance where the wealth of the Arcona content is now available to CEO Nexus members through our member resource center at no charge. And they basically can, on a self-directed basis or with your assistance, navigate that content, which I think is brilliant, to better understand their business as a financial asset and make these kind of decisions. But you have to invest, the time and energy to do it. And what we're going to do in our webinar series is pull pieces of that out and make it available in hopes that people, in learning and seeing their business differently, will in fact go in and consume that content. Or if you're not a member, you go directly, to Ryan, and you've got different platforms by which you can disseminate that. Your boot camps are great. We've had many members do that. So a little throw you a bone in terms of your programs, because our members found them very valuable. But I guess if you could talk about how the syncing up the three statements makes a difference, and then how you could start to do that in an annual planning session, knowing that that's a work in progress, and you're going to have to. And sometimes you have to build that cash flow statement. A lot of people don't have that. And that's been an observation. As you've embraced some of our clients, you're surprised, as are we, that maybe the financial horsepower in those organizations wasn't what you thought, and they need to do some.
I think it all starts with how you actually started the conversation, Steve, which is most second stage entrepreneurs found out they were unemployable or they wanted autonomy. And usually that's not because they had the letter CPA at the back of their name. And so I think we just teed up the reason that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, no human can know it all. And so whatever got you into that business is an important part of what helped you succeed, but it surely isn't everything. And therefore you got to backstop. And oftentimes finance is one of those areas where you can up your game.
So I want to do it two ways of kind of teeing this up, and then I want you to keep asking questions. One is that, like, because we just got done with a boot camp, and we out of 31 people that were in the boot camp, Steve, this time. I mean, we went around the biggest takeaway, and it's like, what's shifting the goal is what people kept saying, away from revenue to target equity valuation. And I think about, because if I wanted to go to Florida and just Florida was my goal, how big Florida is, right? You got 6 hours between yourself and a couple of the groups, right? I mean, that gets a huge deal. You go into a motel, you staying with someone on their couch, you go into a luxury hotel. I mean, it's this multidimensional nature, and revenue in my mind is so myopic that it doesn't allow us to unpack how do we get there, and how do we see with precision, like you said. So the target equity valuation is super important, because you have the multiple, which is the annual cash flow, times then the multiple. So you got the normalized EBITDA, which is the annual cash flow, times the multiple, which is the number of years of cash flow that someone's going to give. And then you have the debt that's in the business. Those three things are going to make up that target equity valuation. And that is an asset. We all want an asset to grow in value. So I always give the example. My father and I, we had a $21 million business that lost almost $1 million in 2009. If we would have sold the business in 2009, we'd have owed the bank a couple $1 million. So we could have gotten to Florida and owed the bank money. It sounds like a journey that's not worth it, other than it might be warm. But so that goal, I'm just so adamant that it can't just be revenue tied to the BHAG, the 5 and the 10 and the 1, and it just has to be that target equity valuation. And I've seen from the keynotes I've been doing with Vistage and all the associations this year, that most people don't know what their company's worth and what creates value. I mean, what is your experience with your members of just an understanding of that goal and valuations in general?
Well, I think there are parallels. So I mean, it's not universal, but absolutely, more people need to understand that linkage to their end game. And I would qualify it further, is that, and this is having the insight of having worked with you and how you address these things, is that, what does that, beyond numbers, what does it look like in terms of how you're going to treat your employees? I mean, the whole notion of ESOP, not ESOP. Well, I've got a whole different business model potentially and different investment strategy if I'm on an ESOP path or if I'm on the
Yep.
other.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the difference and you're not clear on what you want, and you're making decisions that are sort of covering your bets, you're leaving money on the table, and you're not maximizing the value for you or for your family or for your employees, or however that's structured.
Or you're changing the experience that you wanted. You made a bet and you wanted one experience and you got a different one.
So that's what I like about your process, is that you get people to think about where they're going and then work backward and make decisions tying them to the financials. So that a financial decision for a piece of equipment or a high cost talent is getting you to the goal that will be multiplied.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea.
And that's very helpful. And so then when I think about your question about the EOS, so let's say someone's rolling into an EOS planning meeting in the next month or so, or honestly, whenever, and they're thinking about the next 12 months, what I see that good budgeting consists of, if someone wanted to like really lean into that EOS process or their annual planning process, is taking the three functions, Steve, of the sales and marketing, ops, and finance, and treating and starting the budgeting process with those three functions. And it's really the income statement. Because, and I want to unpack that in a sec, but I want to finish this whole thought. But if we look at the income statement, that's what everybody's familiar with and everybody's comfortable with. The income statement, the P&L, revenue, cost of goods, and then OPEX, overhead, SG&A, whatever people want to call it. But the balance sheet then is, that's for the bankers. And then the cash flow statement, from my experience now over the last 5 years, I mean, it's single digits to people that actually look at that stuff. And in 21, Steve, I interviewed like almost 100 CFOs, all making between 200 and 400 grand, working for private equity, big companies, and like 10 forecasted out the three statements. And I'm like, that's so crazy. So when I think about just the income statement, well, I'm going to tie these three together, and then we'll talk about how the process should work. But you have your income statement, you sell something, and then it goes. A lot of times you have receivables, and that receivable goes on your balance sheet. And if you don't have receivables, let's say you get a customer deposit, it's a liability because you owe someone something at some point. And then with your cost of goods, you're buying things, so that usually is a payable. That goes on as your balance sheet as a liability, or you have accrued payroll. So there's this interplay between like the income statement and the balance sheet. I think most people are very comfortable with, but then they're only looking at the balance sheet of like, how much can I get on my line of credit? What will the bank loan me? So that way, just in case when shit hits the fan, I'll be able to like at least tap the line of credit. But they're not using that as any analytics or forecasting. It's just leverage and loan and borrowing capacity versus the income statement is the forecast. And the questions that what you alluded to, which is, should I buy inventory or not? Can I take my distributions? Yeah. Should I buy that company? Can I hire
Here we are in Q4, and these are common themes that are coming up in all the roundtable discussions. And we should have been having these discussions 6 months ago and tying them to financials. And so I think your earlier point that financial literacy, there's room for growth for both CEOs.
Well said. That was gracious of you.
and it's not a rub. It's just that, the visionary temperament and the obligations and all, it's hard to execute on both of those, and something gets missed. Whereas having either a fully functioning CFO, having a fractional CFO, or having the knowledge that you can tap into, like your organization, where you can make more informed decisions, makes a world of difference. Because waiting too long, missing opportunities, that's way more common than you would think.
Well, and you don't want to have false confidence. Like, you want real confidence, like you had said. And before I continue, just for the listeners what I'm about to go into, if people conceptually understand this, I think people can go back and then actually still just focus on the income statement and the forecasting, and let the finance and the either finance or math and a dashboard or something like that glue all the pieces together. I'm not suggesting that we have to create financial engineers that are reading cash flow statements all day long. But if I own Arcona, you own CEO Nexus, and I know from my ownership position right now, I want to know that Arcona is growing in equity value. I want to have visibility into my distributions and my salary. and visibility into my taxes. And then I got enough working capital in there to fund the growth while hitting my distributions and my taxes. Otherwise, I'm going to go get a job at 3M and get a $10,000 pension per month instead of doing this. Like, why else do this? And all I want to know is, if I hire Steve, the CEO for my company, and he's 250 grand in the middle of the year, can I keep my distributions, my taxes, and my working capital? It's really that simple, right?
Yeah. Well. So the couple thoughts is that shameless plug. Those of our clients that have been through the boot camp and/or have retained an Arcona resource of some kind have all elevated their game in terms of financial literacy and lowered the anxiety because they can see into the business and they can see into the future in ways they couldn't before. So I say I can't share any of it, but I can tell you absolutely demonstrated difference in terms of helping. But let me add one variable to all this and then get your feedback. There's a range of engagement from open book policy, where those kind of insights and decisions are happening in an annual plan, and close to the vest, that's for me to know and you to never know. And we have both and everything in between. I'd say, just based on what you're talking about, at the risk of scaring the non-open book policy people and/or getting comfortable with how you communicate that in an annual plan, what works in your experience?
I will break it down so that way whatever someone wants to do, they can do it, but it's still pegged to the target equity valuation. That's the most important part. Like, the person listening in, that's the owner. So I'll break this down. The ownership group has to determine a target equity valuation at a point in time that they want. So let's just play this role play game. Steve, you and I are 50-50 partners. Okay. We need to come up with a target equity valuation at a point in time to say, Steve, what's going to be worth it for you, man? Like, seriously, like, is it going to be $1 million in 2 years, or is it 10? Because that's going to impact our growth rate, how we're going to fund it, and the distribution. So, and this is where you and I are different ages. Like, we would have to consider our age. We don't have to share net worths with each other, but people listening in, a lot of times they have an investor group, different partners, different ages. You could be the same age. Someone's worth $100 million and someone's broke. I mean, like, we're people. But the thing is, the shared thing is we have an entity that we need to get from point A to point B, and that point B needs to be a target equity valuation. And if we think about what valuations are consisted of, the normalized EBITDA, so that annual cash flow times a multiple, which is the number of years of cash flow, and then debt. So we want to be focusing on increasing cash flow, de-risking cash flow, and paying down debt to get to that target equity valuation. But once that goal is determined, then we have to say, okay, well, what distributions do we both want? Because if we both need $500,000 and there's, after taxes, there's only $4 left, the CEO that's running our company is not going to be able to invest much. This is a big, big miss. I see tons of companies do. The owners go, we want to go from 5 million to 10 million. And then they suck all the cash out, and the president's sitting there with nothing to fund the company. And then they can't pay their taxes. I see so much conflict happen right around that topic.
Well, I'll give you one example from a group in Orlando, and the CEO has a partner and different ages, just like you said. And the power of this kind of insight, and I don't know if they're an actual client of yours, but they understand these issues better than most. And what it leads to is healthy conversations, so that those partners can understand the points of view, and then they can have a conversation such that they can come to some compromise. So the retirement or the exit for one player is definitely sooner than the other, but because they understand the financials more clearly than a lot of companies, they've reached a compromise that both can live with. And the beauty is the business is stronger because their financial literacy is higher, and the health of the relationship is protected versus hitting some wall 2 years out when one person can't go on in their mind and the other person has a 10-year runway.
Yeah.
And then we got a painful go through the ownership agreement and figure out and it's not on our terms, it's circumstantially driven because they just didn't have the clarity of communication. So
Right. And think about if they didn't do that. So they're going to sit in an annual planning meeting, talk about some arbitrary revenue goal and talk about some arbitrary rocks that are randomly costing random amounts of money. And then they go back and they get in their car, they talk to their spouses over the holidays, and then they get back on January 1st and they go, you know what? I actually don't want to do this. And so because there's no, what does it mean to me as an owner? So like ownership, not the leadership team, operations and leadership is different. So going back to let's say it's you and I, we say, okay, Steve and Ryan, we want $1 million normalized EBITDA to 5 times multiple. So a $5 million valuation in 3 years. Okay, well, let's say we're doing $1 million right now. So we want to go from $1 million to 2 million. Just bear with me, listeners here. So we got $1 million right now. And this is important because if Steve and I want to go from $1 million to 2 million, we're going to have to fund that. So what we have to do is if Steve and I, like, let's say Steve, you and I each need, let's say we each need $100,000. We're in Minnesota. We pay $300,000 in taxes on $1 million. You and I each get $100,000. There's only $500,000 left over. So like, that's all the money we have for the plan this year. Right? Instead of making it up. But think if you and I didn't determine that we both needed $100,000.
Yeah.
It's like you just show up one quarter after the boat show and you're like, I want $100,000. Well, like, says who? And how does that impact the plan? The ERP system that Sally's about to install is about $100,000. And like, so like ownership has to say, what is the valuation target? So from 1 million to 2 million, a 5X to a 6X, and the timeline will then dictate, can Steve and I pull the money out or not?
Yeah. And then build it from the ground up. Well, so example, and this is throwing a credit to EOS. It's on that theme. A lot of people get stuck on self-implementation because they think, well, my business, I understand the issues, I can lead meetings, and they bristle at hiring an implementer because it's not cheap, and it puts accountability on a visionary's shoulders that they maybe don't want. And there are lots of reasons to not hire an implementer, but there's so many examples of it being transformational for the business because the best implementation of EOS, in my experience, is when an outside implementer is matched well stylistically, and they they execute on the potential of the framework. But them getting over the money hurdle, because it's multiple sessions, sometimes multiple years. But then when you understand normalized EBITDA, and you can go back and say, well, that was a one-time deal, and I'm not. It's not money lost; it's money invested. And so maybe talk about that. How different in the normalizing the EBITDA, when you understand the numbers, it helps give you the confidence. Better decisions, faster with greater confidence. The whole notion is the barriers, whether it's equipment or an implementer, it's easier because you see the holistic.
Oh, it fits. What does it mean to the goal? Yeah.
Explain how that would work. Not just implementer.
Yeah. I'm tracking you, Steve. And maybe kind of a comment. Again, Steve and I are talking about EOS listeners here, but it could be scaling out. It could be your own system for 2 days. It could be OKRs. It doesn't matter. But what I see works really well, Steve, is that let's say again, you and I are partners. We talk like, what do we need numbers wise from an asset perspective first, before we don't have to have our operations and our leadership team in the discussion of how much money does Steve and Ryan want to pull out of this. Like private equity or family offices, they talk about what is this thing worth and how much money can we suck out of this, and then they hire people to do the work for them. I mean, like, that's what we're talking about here. So, and we will get to the open book management question too. I don't want to forget that. But so let's say you and I walk in, because we also have leadership hats on, because you and I both don't have to go to those strategy meetings if one of us is just an owner. So maybe let's take this example where you and I'm the investor, you're actually the CEO. So you and I sit down. I'm like, we both determined we want $100,000 in distributions each year. We got $300,000 in taxes. So there's $500,000 left for cash flow to invest in the company over the next 12 months. So then Steve goes into the meeting, again, operations. I don't get a paycheck because I'm just an owner. I just get distribution. Steve has a job, so he also gets a paycheck. You go in, you hire an EOS implementer, and when we're talking about the goal being the target normalized EBITDA, and then there's a multiple of 3-4 years, that normalized EBITDA, it's not net income, because all net income doesn't tell me anything. Your boats are in there, your cars are in there, the EOS implementer is in there, the ERP system that you installed one time is in there. So, and again, revenue doesn't account for all that. So that we got revenue. Let's think revenue is important. Maybe if you want to share that with the whole team, and we can wrap up with that. See, like, what do you want to share with the rest of the rank and file? But at the end of the day, if we say, okay, we want to target normalized EBITDA of $2 million, we've got $500,000 this year that we can invest. Well, you and I both already determined that we can make our distributions, if we hit our goal. Well, now let's start with sales and marketing. Sales and marketing, like, hey, we want to, maybe there's a sales consultant that's going to teach people about messaging and cold calling. It's 30 grand. Well, it's a use of cash, but hopefully it makes your team better, and it should de-risk your future cash flow. So you're getting a bump in your multiple over time, hopefully. It's a use, back to Steve's question, it's a use of cash. So you're using some cash, and hopefully your whole company can still get funded and grow with that use of cash. And so in that budgeting process, sales and marketing, ops, and finance should be talking about their rocks as either are these going to be one-time investments, one-time expenses, or are they going to be ongoing? Because that will then impact the normalized EBITDA. And you can like literally make all those investments and reduce your net income, but your normalized EBITDA might grow.
Right.
So you're focused on the right one, right? Like, well, why are we focused on? I mean, sure, play the tax game. Don't pay as little as taxes as you can, but don't sacrifice the long term. And here's the final point to this, Steve. It's actually a common shared connection of ours. And before we were working with them, like, yeah, we bought a building and put like $4 million into it, and because of, we had a huge tax bill. And then in like May the next year, they almost ran out of money for payroll, because good God forbid we save some money on taxes, but we need to keep everybody employed in 6 months. And there was, because they were playing the net income game, not the normalized EBITDA game. So like, I'd say first, does that address your normalized EBITDA question?
Yeah,
I don't
right.
know.
Well, the point is there are multiple variables, but it's changing the context of your thinking around one to the other. That to me is the step change in the value of understanding the sort of the Arcona methodology, and the notion of linking these financials in the annual planning process, so that it doesn't come back and bite you later. I mean,
well, and we're just still talking about the income statement. So, and we'll wrap up in like 10, 15 minutes here for the listeners, is just to kind of tie it together, and again, I'm promoting that you don't, like, the people listening in, you don't have to know how to mathematically tie all the stuff together. You just have to understand how to think differently, like Steve just mentioned. So, Steve, what I love about the 3 financial statements, and specifically the income statement and the EOS traction model, we have three main functions underneath the integrator, right? We've got sales and marketing, operations, and then SG&A and finance and overhead. So the way that you should budget to actually get this all done mathematically correct, to get the visibility of because the whole goal is we want to project out and see the normalized EBITDA and the valuation into the future. Like, that's absolutely possible if we're doing what we're talking about. But sales, all budgeting has to start with sales. So it's like, Steve, if I was working for you and I was running your sales department, you're going, Ryan, what are you going to sell next year? Like, we have to start there, because we have to build the cost structure based on what we're going to sell. So you go line by line by line in the general ledger, like, and the products and services have to be broken out based on what someone sells. Because for us, like our Kona boot camps, the online academy, our dashboard services, and our CFO services all have different margins and cash flow attributes. So if I don't break those out, I don't have any visibility into analytics into the future.
Yeah.
So we go line by line by line, and then we go month by month by month and it has to start with sales and marketing, saying, what do you think you're going to sell in each month with a 50-50 chance of hitting it? Because, and we can talk, you and I have some shared stories about people that overdid their budget or undershot it. Either you're firing people or you can't actually recognize the sales. Either way, it's not good. So you want that 50-50 chance, but it's in the month that you're hitting it. Because if the goal is that you and I wanted to determine whether we should hire a $200,000 president in June, you and I need to know, can we still make our $8,300 distribution, pay our taxes, and have the 18 grand to hire the president in the middle of the year? Well, we need to know actual cash, not our income statement, net income, but we need to know actual cash. And so what happens is you take your revenue line by line by line, month by month by month, with a 50-50 chance of hitting it from the ground up. You have to do that. Otherwise, like you said, the divide by 12, if you're seasonal, like, you might not have any cash in June. And so you made a bad bet because you were lazy, right?
Yeah. Man, I don't know how many times that, going through our peer group, we talk about economic cycles and how people are doing. And there are good months, bad months. There are good seasons, bad seasons. And for whatever reason, I'm not confident that they all are fully factored into the budgeting process. And that's where surprises occur. But it occurs to me, and this is more of a challenge for you than a question, but I know that our members and I could better serve our members if we were better at asking questions to challenge assumptions or to smoke out assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
So the CEO doesn't have to be as financially literate
Not at
as
all.
the CFO, but they sure better know it enough to ask the right questions in the right way to smoke out or to confirm assumptions. And
100%.
if there's something you can do in that vein that you can make available to our members, to your audience, I think it would make a world of difference, because the questions coming from a reliable source becomes confidence in how you engage the director of sales, how you engage all your team members. Because sometimes we just don't know how to frame the right questions. It's in, with the pain point is inside, but how to express it isn't understood.
So a couple comments, and then I'll finish kind of the three functional areas part of the budgeting. But I think, to Steve, your point, the starter kit that we have, where I've got that case study where I'm actually, and for all the listeners, and there's won't be any commercial because this will just be go check out the starter kit. And for any of the CEO Nexus members, they already have access to this, but I show how to budget and project. I use that case study. And honestly, Steve, my opinion on this stuff is very similar to healthcare, where, like, if people aren't careful, they're going to go get it back fused, even though they don't need it back, because the doctor makes $50K every single time they fuse it back. And like, they could go get a new shoulder and be like, no one's saying, hey, Steve, how you feeling? You sleeping good? How, like our healthcare system totally sucks. So like, you have to know enough about your body to not accidentally get a fake hip or knee when you don't need one. And it's the same thing here. You can't outsource the loose understanding of your goal and how this works. And so, like, I will give everybody here, like, I was a copier sales rep and I got a D in accounting. So if I'm capable of doing this, like, I think everybody can, if the why is there and how to think about it, I think that's it. And so, like, let's keep going with this, Steve, because I think line by line by line, and if we're taking the three functional areas of EOS, sales and marketing, ops, and finance. So let's say I was your salesperson and we went line by line by line, month by month by month, 50-50 chance of what we thought we were going to do. Then what we do is go to the next functional area in EOS, the ops and service, and say, whether you're in professional services, your manufacturer, e-commerce, it's the operations, the cost of goods. Cost of goods correlates with ops, right? In the EOS. So cost of goods is what then results in gross profit. So the operations manager should be, the KPI should be the gross profit, right? That are per line, per month,
instead of siloed, like,
right. Yeah. And like they're not going to make up their cost of goods without the salesperson's input. Like, unless we sell shit, we don't have any cost of goods. So like, if we have the sales, month by month by month, and then we go to the service department and say, you now have to hit these gross profit numbers because we feel like we got the 50-50 chance answer correct. So then operations goes line by line by line and says, what do we actually, can we deliver these products and services at the margins that we need? So let's say, and my story about that, Steve, is my old service manager, Pat Simnisky, God bless his soul, I love him to death. And he's like, hey, we want every technician to go to Canon in New York to get certified on the new Canon line. I'm like, Steve, it's going to cost us like $200,000. And like, we're going to have technicians out of the field for like 2 years. I'm like, no, but then we, the no actually had validation behind, like, we can't hit our margins if we're doing that. And he said, well, what if we send Jim and Brad there, get certified to train the trainer, and then we had a monthly train the trainer, and it worked. And it was like 10 grand.
So you break down the siloed thinking and you show how you're interdependent. and
Yep.
then
Yep.
it makes a difference.
So
Well,
then,
that
oh, go
speaks
ahead.
back to my original point was we focus on the self-awareness of the CEO, the alignment and the trust-based relationship of the leadership team, and then the culture that can scale. And if those silos of sales, finance, and operations aren't healthy and communicating and willing to horse trade, things break down.
100%. And so, like, let's say, looking at the time here, I just want to make sure that, because we're not getting too technical, this is all in the starter kit and the case study for anybody listening in, or the academy for CEO Nexus members. But let's say we got sales and we got that confident and we feel good about that. Service or ops, we feel good about that. Then we go to SG&A, overhead, finance, whatever, OpEx, whatever you want to call it. It's usually the CFO that's running it, if they have someone, or it's the owner, or it's a controller, and the owner thinks that it all breaks down depending on the level of the talent there. But finance's role is to oversee SG&A, OpEx, overhead, to make sure that then the net income is right. Right. So then they have to say, well, how many staples? And I mean, essentially with SG&A and overhead, you could most likely take and do some assumptions. Because Steve, out of the hundreds of companies I've worked with in the financials, it's 10 lines. And even with people with thousands of GL structures, it's 10 lines that make a difference. Everything else, you could do the add 5%. But if you're going to buy a building, if you're going to do all these huge investments or whatever it is that are in OpEx, this is where it's a use of cash. So hey, Steve, you and I, we want to launch a new website for $100,000 next year. Okay. Where we're going to use the cash. Then the question is, can Ryan and Steve still make their distributions if we do that?
Right.
Yes, we can. Can we still pay our taxes? Yes, we can. Do we still have enough cash? Yes, we do. So we're going to do the $100,000 investment into a website, and the CFO approves it because we still hit the margins and we still have the sales, and we can't get visibility if we don't have the sales and the margin visibility. But that $100,000 is an add back. So we actually are forecasting the investment, but we're forecasting out the normalized EBITDA. So then that CFO or that finance function should be building out that overhead and SG&A and getting down to that normalized EBITDA. So literally the three functions, sales and marketing, ops, and finance, it starts that way too. You get the sales, ops, and then finance, and then you have your normalized EBITDA. And Steve and Ryan still need to hit our distributions. And so if we go through that, then I think that the confidence is these rocks that we're picking have context, right? They make sense. And if you don't need a new website, don't do that, right? Take the money home. I'd rather have 150, wouldn't you?
Well, so what the initial appeal, as we talked years ago about sort of how you bring clarity to the financial fabric of your company, it's the financial framework that Traction operates as the operational framework. Traction doesn't get into this granularity, but if you add Arcona or something like that brings us discipline of thinking and communication, suddenly the Traction functionality is enhanced because you brought discipline and accountability. I mean, all the same principles of Traction exist through Arcona. And that's
100%. And this is where when you and I, 100%, when you and I started talking years ago, it's we're not an operating system. Intentional growth of 5 principles is the mindset that clarifies people's goals and helps them understand what they should be working on. If you think about just at the literal definition of an operating system, it's like your computer. If you don't sit down in front of your computer and type anything, your operating system just sits there. If you go on there and do stupid things, download bad apps and crash your computer, your operating system didn't protect you from doing the wrong things. It just enhances what you're doing, right? So you have to know what the hell you want and why and where you're going in order to use an operating system correctly, right? I mean, otherwise you're just just hoping that it just works. So Steve, this has been so fun because again, like I said, every time I talk to you, I think I'm talking to a massive amount of people behind you that are just inciting the conversations. Maybe why don't you give us a little bit of a overview of why a peer group? You already mentioned it a little bit, but why don't you just give us again, when you see the power that a peer group can do for someone, and then where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, simple destination would be ceonexus.com. That's ceonexus.com. And there's a whole listing of information about what we do, why we do it, who we do it for, and what might be of interest to you. But from a service standpoint, I mean, we think every CEO or every senior decision maker and leadership team should be in a peer group. We believe that ours is uniquely suited for second stage, and to that extent, if you're interested, we have in-person, on-site, full network throughout Florida, growing network in Minnesota, and then we have virtual options, so you could be most anywhere, and we would have a means of serving you. But it really gives you that place, as I mentioned earlier, for context and clarity about tough decisions. And I think that initial phrase that resonated, better decisions faster and with greater confidence. You're the expert in your business. We're expert on process, uniquely tied to second stage. And if you see the benefit of having an objective set of eyes and ears, listening, providing guidance and accountability, reach out to us. We're glad to help, because you're why we're in business. And it goes back to Ed. Ed believed in you. You're the driver of our free enterprise system. Just a little sidebar data point. We had a whole data set tied to our work with the Edward Lowe Foundation based on 18 years of D&B records. And it's amazing how second stage growth companies create more net new sustainable jobs across most time spans, most geographies, because they're the engine for growth. Big companies will add and shed jobs and change 1-2% at most over the years. Small companies will have lots of churn, creation, births and deaths of businesses. Second stage is a particularly enduring stage. And it's just, you don't know it. You're operating in isolation, but you as a cohort across the stage make a huge difference, net difference in our economy. And we're created to serve you. So if you see
the backbone of America, it really is.
Yeah, that was Ed's belief, and I'm glad to carry that message.
Yeah, it was not like the jobs report where I think they said there was a positive jobs report, but actually, if you dig into it, it was actually a bunch of government jobs in the private sector lost. Like, that's not adding productive jobs.
You can play with the numbers. The work we did was through the foundation. It was net new. I mean, the lift was about 12 to 13% of businesses in most geographies are second stage, and they generated 30 to 35% of the net new sustainable jobs. So they were disproportionately productive. And that'll happen without us. But if we can make that path easier, straighter, faster, we're glad to do it.
And I'll put the cherry on top. That is also like when I put up the U.S. Census Bureau, Steve, when we're doing our spiel together, and like I want to help grow the value of those so that they can actually make assets that are worth it, and they can facilitate the transitions. See, this has been a blast. I'm so happy you're able to come on and make it work.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate the time.